If you turn to 2 Peter, we'll be looking at the 3rd chapter. As I said earlier, we'll be preaching the 2nd chapter, the latter half of it, tonight, so I want to encourage you to be back for that. And we move into this 3rd chapter and looking at the first 7 verses. The greatest pacifist among us needs to realize that we are currently engaged in a fierce battle that has dire consequences if we lose. It is a contest in which the field of battle is also the prize. You're enlisted in this battle, in this fight, whether you recognize it or not. And the battle that we're going to talk about from the Scriptures this morning that Peter brings to our attention, the battle is for and in your mind. This morning, we want to consider, what is the controlling force of your actions? Have you ever just taken a step back and asked yourself, why do I do the things I do? Why do I respond to my children in this manner, whether it's good or bad? Why do I come to church? Why do I love my spouse? Why am I faithful at my job? Why do I do this or why do I do that? Why do I do the things that I do? But I want to go deeper than just our actions of what I do. And we want to really lay down and see what the Scripture teaches as to why I do what I do. Because our actions are ultimately controlled by something. Now you, contrary to evolutionary teaching, you are not an animal. According to evolutionary teaching, animals work off of instinct. And so whatever happens, the certain stimuli that they are given, it will always produce a certain response. So if something happens over here, the animal only knows to respond this way. He really doesn't have a choice in the matter. He has to respond that way. He's an animal. You are not an animal. You have a choice. And so if I come up and I kick you in the shin, you have a choice to respond one way or another. Now the natural response, the most natural response is to kick me back in my shin. That's natural, but that's not godly. Now it wasn't godly of me to do that to you either, but still, your response you have to take care of on your part. So we are not animals. We have choices, and every situation that we have, I have a choice to respond in a godly fashion or an ungodly fashion. But what makes me respond that way? Well, it's our mind, and that's what we're going to look at in the passage before us. So the bottom line is that each person's actions are controlled by the mind, and we each operate our lives by a mindset, or by parameters by which we function and understand life. Peter in this passage is going to give a description of the mind of the saved man. He writes in verse number 1, beloved, to Christians. He writes about what the saved or the spiritual man's mind ought to look like. And then he'll talk about the man who is lost, or the carnal, fleshly mind. The reason the mind is important is because it is where decisions are made. You are making choices in your life. You are thinking through choices, looking at the decisions you need to make, evaluating them in your mind, and making choices that will have consequences for you and for your family. And it's for that reason we want to make sure that our minds are set and aligned with God's mind, so that our mindset is set according to God's ways and God's truth. So in understanding these two mindsets and two ways of thinking, and I want you to consider that as we move through the passage, let's first look at the mind of the saved. All right, look at verse number 1. Peter writes and begins by saying, this second epistle, this is 2 Peter, this second epistle or second letter, beloved, I now write unto you, in both which I stir up or awaken your pure minds by way of remembrance. Peter says, I'm writing this second letter and I'm writing it for a purpose. I want to stir up, shake up, or awaken your pure mind. He wants to do this because he knows it will influence how you act. We need to be stirred up. Left to its own, our minds often revert to the lowest common denominator. Have you ever heard the cliche that the idle mind is the devil's workshop? There really is a lot of truth to that. And Peter says, I want to stir up your mind. I want to awaken your mind. I don't want it to just rest in idle or be left to idle. I want to stir it up. I want to awaken it so that it drives you to action. That is why to stir up has the idea of purposeful action, to awaken your mind, and that is exactly what stir up means. It means to awaken fully. It's those two words jammed together. To stir up is to awaken fully. You will not serve God by accident. If you get to the end of your life and you're able to look back on a life lived in service to God, it is because of choices that you made along the way. Many of those choices were hard choices, like this morning, getting out of bed and coming to church. That was a hard choice for me. I want to just keep hitting that snooze, and I hit it probably about 4 times. And then finally I rolled out of bed and I'm here. But life is made up of choices, and you think through those choices. Very rarely do you just react, and even in those reactions, you still have moments to think. But the whole point of life is you're making choices on a daily basis. You are choosing what's important. You are choosing between whether you should do this or whether you should do that. And we need to make sure that those choices are following God's way and God's design. You will not be carried along to do God's will, but rather you need to serve God by choice, making difficult choices in your home, difficult choices in your life, but making them based upon the truth that God has revealed in His Word. But note what kind of mind Peter says is to be stirred up. It's not just any mind, but rather he says in verse number 1, I write the second epistle, in both which I stir up your pure minds by way of remembrance. You know, there are some things that are not good to stir up. Just a couple of weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago now, I was cutting some firewood on our property, and we had these big logs. They're probably this big around. I think they're beech wood. And so I was going out down to the bottom of where that wood is, and there's probably about 5 or 6 of them just laying there. And so I went over and I picked up one of them, and I set it on the ground. I was starting to chop it, and I noticed that I had stirred up, I had awakened some bees. And I am allergic to bees, and I don't die. Well, I haven't yet, but that's pretty clear, right? But I'm not deathly allergic to bees. I don't need an EpiPen or anything like that, as far as I can tell. But I do blow up really big. Like one time when I was little, I got stung on my pinky, and it was huge. I mean, it was like bigger than all my others combined. And so my body swells when I get stung. And so, you know, I'm there, I'm chopping wood, and so I noticed that I have awakened, I've stirred up these bees. Okay, now it would have been wise for me to walk away, but I figured, you know, I've got a nice heavy jacket on. I was covered from neck down, and, you know, I was chopping the wood. I had my glasses on, I had a hat on, and I had earmuffs on. So, I mean, what could they do to me, really? So anyway, so I'm chopping wood. There I'm going, chopping. And they were starting to dive bomb me. I mean, I could hear them hitting my earmuffs. They were like, bink, bink. You know, they were coming at me. And so I thought, that's kind of funny. You know, they're trying to get at me. And so they're hitting me, and I'm chopping away, and I'm getting through that piece of wood. And all of a sudden, this one bee, I mean, he wedged himself in between my earmuff and my hat and my glasses, and he stung me right on the temple, right there. And Jeff has a picture on his phone if you want to see it. I think Sarah's got a picture. My face blew up. I mean, it was huge. I mean, it was all puffed out, and everything was really, really big, and it was quite a sight to behold. But, you know, there are some things you don't want to stir up, right? Very clearly, I did not want to, or I should not have, stirred up that beehive. I shouldn't have done that, and having realized that, I probably should have ran away. But there are things in life that you don't want to stir up. But Peter here says, I do want you to stir up this. I want to stir up your pure mind. Now, he doesn't want your mind to be stirred up or awakened towards sin. He doesn't want it to be excited towards sin, but rather he wants it to be stirred up or excited towards God. And so definitely there are some things that we ought not to awaken. If your mind is awakened or excited to sin, it is not good. Peter is not saying just stir up your mind and whatever comes out, go for it. No, he says stir up your pure mind. Make sure that it is purity that is the focus of your mind. But if your mind is awakened and stirred up to please God, then that is wonderful. The word pure that is used here is a word that means to be judged by sunlight. That's what the word pure in this passage means. It means that it is a genuine, real, true thing that even under